Welcome, welcome, welcome. And here we are again. The trio, we're back. Another month. And I mean, it's actually still quite light outside. It's actually quite nice for a change.
Finally, Laura. It's been a long winter, as it always seems to be.
I was having a conversation with somebody on Monday at an event in London, and this guy said, I'm just coming out of hibernation. I feel it's been a very, very long winter.
Well, I've actually seen a lot of people make the point that we have this idea that the year starts on January 1st, but our own circadian rhythms would be much more designed for our year to start at springtime itself,
Yeah, there's some cultures where it does, doesn't there? I can't remember who was telling me the other day that their new year starts at the spring equinox, and that makes a lot more sense, doesn't it?
an awful lot more. Yeah. So what you're saying, Dan, is I can finally start my New Year's resolutions now, as opposed to
Yeah,
I've failed them already.
I'm in.
Yeah, so basically we can snooze for 3 months and then start in March is really what we're saying.
I think that's what we're built to do, really, Laura. I mean, in the middle of Christmas, we ramp it up. We have all these parties and we get really busy when our bodies just want to shut down and sleep.
Exactly. So here we are. Are we truly living? Well, we're busy sort of setting the pace for hibernation for 3 months at the beginning of the year. So I don't know, maybe are we truly living? But here we are. We are, however, exploring different things. But today we're exploring turning action into meaningful impact and what it means to have conviction. Because I don't know. So I was reading through all the comments on the post to this event, and what does it mean to have conviction? Conviction to drive change. We can believe in all manner of different things, but unless we act upon it, what's the real impact? So I don't know. Let's start right at the beginning. And Mark, what does conviction actually mean to you? What does it mean to lead with conviction?
Does it? Okay. So to lead with conviction is, for me, in a very basic term, is to carry out and do the thing you said you were going to do, and to follow through on the thing you said you're going to do when you said you were going to do it, and why you were going to do it, what your intention was behind it. So I feel it's to bring in intention into what we do. Because a lot of us, we kind of live by default a lot, Laura. We kind of do things because we do them. We do things because we've always done them. We do things because they're easy. How much conviction is really in and behind what we do? Look, to go back to the joke I cracked at the start about New Year's resolutions, okay? Like New Year's resolutions, we might, we often say them with a level of conviction. I am gonna do this. But we don't have any meaning or intention behind that conviction to say. So for me, conviction is important as a starting point, as that thing that channels the energy and the motivation into what we say we're going to do. But it's just a starting point, because we can say a lot of stuff with conviction. Like this weekend, I am definitely going to weed that garden. Yeah, let's see. So it is the starting point to drive the energy towards what we need, but it's only the starting
point. Yeah, I think you're right. It's that it is a starting point. It's that whole thing of that doesn't mean anything unless you actually carry through with it, and and I guess it's that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, I know, Dan, where does it mean, or what does conviction mean to you? I mean, is it an extension of just believing and then acting upon it, or is it more than that?
Yeah, I think it's more than that, Laura. And Mark used a great word there, which is intention, right? And so for me, conviction comes from understanding why you are doing what you're doing, from what emotional value it is you're seeking from what you're doing. Because conviction is all about staying the course, and having discipline and commitment and seeing through, and as Mark said, being of your word, and words, thoughts, and actions all aligning because that's what gives you conviction. If one of those is out of whack or out of alignment, then you're not going to have conviction. If you don't really understand why you're doing what you're doing, the first bump in the road is going to knock you off course, and you'll probably stop. We talked there about resolutions, and often resolutions, we don't see them through because we haven't set our intention. We don't know why we're doing them. We're doing them because we think we should, or because somebody else did them, or because it seems like the right thing to do, when actually conviction comes from really understanding what your intention is, what you're trying to achieve. And we've got the word meaning in the title today, and I think that's really important, is that when we do decide to align our words, thoughts and our actions, is that there is meaning behind the intention, because that's what gives us courage, that's what makes us brave, that's what means we don't fall at the first hurdle.
And I think that is exactly it. It is that understanding. It is that almost inner strength, grounding, taking the ground that keeps us strong within ourselves, so that when the world starts to shift, actually that's still holding us true. But I guess it's really easy when it's like the world isn't shifting and the dust isn't flying around us, and I guess that's the point. But I suppose with that, it's like we can all say that back to our resolutions, you will say we're going to do this, that and the other, and it's easy to say that we're going to exercise or weed the garden. In Mark's case this weekend, we'll expect full pictures on Monday of how far you got.
No intention behind what I said there. Zero intention.
No conviction. So if you take that example, it's like it's kind of playing into Dan's point around you can do it, but actually there's no real intention, there's no motivation, there's no steps to taking forward, and therefore it's not going to happen. And therefore, actually, even if it became like harder and the world was busy and you had a whole load of things, because your intention wasn't there, then you're not going to do it. But I guess that starts from the beginning, but it's when you've already started and then the world gets harder. How do we remain committed and to the conviction? Can you say that? Committed to the conviction, committed to turning it into action without losing yourself in it.
I want to touch on what Dan was saying about the word meaning and how important that is for that aspect of things, Laura. But even as you're speaking there, right? Like, we're looking at the word conviction, right? And I was thinking about, so where does that word come up in our language, and how do we use it in our language, right? To convict is it's a criminal thing, right? You get convicted of a crime because there's a definition, there's something definite about that conviction piece. And you can go online now and you'll find people who are convicted, and convince is another aspect. Convince is another part of that word too. The idea is the world is flat. That of all sorts of bananas ideas now. Maybe they're right. Maybe I haven't walked off the edge of it yet myself. But it's interesting the power that comes with that, and how it can be dangerous if it's not got what's the right thing behind it, in terms of. If you're looking, let's to go back to that example of the world is flat and these kind of concepts and ideas. They're looking for, what are they looking for in that? What are they looking to prove out? What are they looking to understand of themselves, of the world? That becomes the thing that you you become convicted of and you become convinced of. What's the meaning in that for you? What does it give you? As a person, do you feel like maybe you've met a community? Do you feel like you're smart enough? Or do you feel like it puts a shape into the, I'm doing a round shape, which is right, it puts a shape into the world you live in, But do you know? And so it's like it comes back to that meaning thing, right? So if we are to continue with that conviction, well, what does the thing actually give us? What kind of meaning does it add into our life in those terms? Because aren't we always kind of seeking that in a way? We're seeking that sense of meaning in what we do. And I think like the crackpot theories, and it's because we're struggling for meaning in so many things that we find meaning in nonsense arguments about unverifiable things that have been verified forever, or things that are completely unverifiable, because somehow we can attach a part of ourselves to it. For us, if the impact has to be meaningful, and look, doesn't that beg the question too, right? If we're trying to have a meaningful impact, what does meaningful to me mean as opposed to meaningful to you, as opposed to meaningful to Dan, as opposed to meaningful to Keyboard Warrior somewhere, and what determines what is really true about that for each one of us?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think and what is meaningful to all three of us will be very, very different. Because our need at what it gives us is going to be different. I'm kind of trying to put it into better words, but I'm sort of sitting there, and I was kind of doing some I call it research earlier today about well-known figures who have been not necessarily about the world being flat, but well-known figures who have been had total conviction with what they were doing. So Mandela being one, being 27 years in prison because he was absolutely his conviction to the cause, that was the sacrifice he was prepared to make. Then you've got sort of Malala Yousafzai and the rights of young women and education, and her conviction there. And then Martin Luther King as well, talking about his conviction. And I think that there is all of those things were giving meaning, in those cases they were giving meaning not just to themselves and their immediate friend, but also the broader society, and it came at great cost to them. So I guess it's not always for me around that it just makes sense to us in order for us to navigate the world. Sometimes it's for a cause that's bigger than ourselves too, but it's still giving us something, and I think that's one of the keys. I was kind of quite fascinated by it, because it can drive us to keep taking steps forward when we're absolutely convicted to the cause. That belief can become so strong. I don't know, Dan, what?
Yeah, well, I think the difference here, right, is having an intrinsic conviction as opposed to an extrinsic conviction. Right. So the guys, the people you've talked about there, Malala Yousafzai, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, they had an intrinsic conviction because in their hearts, they knew what they were doing to be right. They weren't doing it because anybody else told them to. They weren't following a crowd. They weren't. It wasn't a learnt conviction, something from outside of themselves. It was an internal knowing that told them this was the right thing to do, despite lots of opposition, despite lots of things getting in their way. All three of those people could be forgiven for losing the courage of their conviction at some point because of how much opposition they faced, because of what they had to go through. But they didn't, because they had an internal knowing. Almost, we talked in the last one we did about certainty, didn't we? And how we're all looking for certainty. And all those people you named there had a certainty that they were on the right path, that this was something that was going to take the world forward, that this was going to improve humanity. Unlike those that might think the world is flat. How's that going to improve humanity? How's that going to take us forward? It isn't, is it? It's going to take us backwards, because we all know that's rubbish. So it's very much that, do we know ourselves? Are we being quiet and still enough to listen to that inner voice that tells us what our convictions are, that tells us what is meaningful to us? Or are we listening to outside influences? are we swayed by dogma and ideology and other people and the crowd? Because that's an external, extrinsic conviction. And there are plenty of people that are convinced and convicted with ideology, but that's not going to drive us forward. That's not going to change humanity. That's us being herd-like and tribal. And so I think that's for me, that's the major difference, is intrinsic versus extrinsic, an internal knowing versus following the crowd.
I'm just going to bring in Laurie and Claudie's point. So Laurie's saying, conviction to me is like accountability for my choices and responses to life and how I treat others. I don't know, guys, before I move on to Claudie's comment, I thought, I think this is a very fair point. You're nodding there nicely, Dan. Mark, too.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that the word accountability. And it's right. It's about that inner knowing, isn't it? And making a choice and getting that feeling that, this is the right path. This feels, it's like an inner knowing, isn't it? It's like in your bones. I know this is the right thing to do, even in the face of opposition, even in the face of easier choices. It's an accountability. It's I know I've got conviction here because I've got this inner intrinsic knowing that's telling me this is the right path, despite opposition, despite people and things getting in my way. I love that. I think that's a really lovely way to put it.
I think it's that. I think the word I'm coming up here with is embodying it. It literally is absolutely every ounce of your being. And so there can be no disconnect, because I think this was something that came up in the discussion in the post itself. Is it's only when things start to get pressured that you actually realise whether it's somebody's wearing a mask or whether they truly embody the conviction and the values to which they have. Because when the pressure comes up, if they're wearing a mask, then the disconnect means that things start to fall apart. So I think it's the fact that it's almost so entrenched in ourselves that actually there's no difference and inwardly. I think Claudie's saying, I feel conviction fuels perseverance and determination. I would agree with that. Mark, you look like you.
It's just when we talk about conviction, I agree with Claudie's point there, right? So our perseverance and determination, if we don't have that conviction, it's very hard to persevere in what we're trying to do. The determination can build in behind it. And even to Laurie's point about accountability, and I always remember a story, something my father did a long, long time ago. And okay, so it was a final of an under-14 team, and our team was playing, our parish, the way we split up in Ireland, was playing another local team, and they were missing a couple of players because they were on holidays. And they asked, could the game be changed? And what everyone would do is go, absolutely not. We're going to win this. No, we have to play the game because we have a great chance of winning. And my dad refused to play the game. He said, you're absolutely right. It wouldn't be fair if we played while your good players were there. And so he got the game rearranged for when their players came back from holiday. And then the other team won the game. And everyone, like in the local area, people were vilifying him for what are you doing? We should have won. We could have won that had we just gone ahead with it and not done it that way. But for him, his conviction was, I have to do the right thing. No matter and I think that's true meaningful impact from a conviction perspective. It's doing the right thing despite what others are saying to you about what is the right thing, despite their impression of what the right thing is. Is the right, that's the thing, is the right thing to win, or is the right thing to win right? And that's the conviction. But that's where, look, you need your perseverance, you need your determination. You need your strength of will to say, well, look, I know what I'm doing. I know I'm doing the right thing. And I suppose if we can say that, we can rest in that space. And that's an important thing to do, because we also know when we have that level of conviction and we're driving down and we have doubt with it. We're like, is this the right thing for me, or is this wrong? And therefore we don't follow through with something. As opposed to when we have that. It's very hard to be sure about stuff, but we can be sure when we know it's right by us. We can be sure.
And I think that's the key thing is when it's right by us, that's when, you know, the world around us can actually be quite crazy. It can come at us loads and loads and loads. But actually, if we're strong in that conviction, that belief in what we're doing that is right by us, then that is, you know, a good place to be. And I think that's where, you know, I talk about the depth and breadth of the root network that we have as individuals, a bit like a tree. And I think that's, you know, one's conviction is the depth and breadth of that root network in order to be able to keep us strong in our conviction to what it is that we're doing, irrespective of what is going on around us. But I love that phrase. You know, somebody else put into the discussion earlier on about the fact that, you know, equally drawing on something that her father had said around, you know, walking the talk. And I know it's not quite the same, and she commented it's not quite the explicit quote that everybody uses, but in the way he had referred to it is this, like, state your values, you know, state what you believe in, and then get on and be, you know, behind that. Don't just state it, otherwise frankly it doesn't mean anything. And, you know, sort of the classic of put up and shut up. So if you're going to put it up there, then actually just get don't just put it up there and then do nothing about it, was really where she was coming from. And I think that's true, and that's very much what you know you're saying, and that your dad was saying to you, Mark. It's you know, I think it's so key. But, you know, I suppose the thing that's kind of going on in my head right now is, how do we find that conviction?
Well, as ever, Laura, it comes back to, and we touch on this every live that we do, it comes back to self-awareness. It comes back to understanding and knowing who you are, what your values are, because how are you going to nail your colours to a mast if you don't know who you are, if you don't know how you feel, if you don't know what emotional values are important to you? You know, this is why people fall for ideology and dogma, because they don't know themselves, because they don't know in their heart what's true and meaningful and impactful for them. So, as ever, it comes back to being able to take the time to get to understand and know yourself, to be able to block out the noise around you, because there are plenty of people to follow, and it sometimes is easy to feel like, oh, that this one looks right today, or no, this one looks right. Oh no, I think I'll go with this one today. But actually, it's about knowing who you are, and again, aligning. Like you were saying, there's no point in declaring to the world, this is what I'm all about, unless you're going to see that through with action. You know, words, thoughts, and actions in alignment. Walking your talk. So, you know, I know that half a decade ago, I would have been a lot of this and not a lot of action. But I've worked on myself and I've changed that now, and I don't declare things aloud unless I'm prepared to see it through with action. And I don't declare things aloud unless I know in my heart that they feel true to me. And that's what's important, that it's true to me, that I can listen to my inner guidance, that I can listen to my conscience, and how I feel. And that's what tells me what's right and what to do and when to take action and when not to. So, as always, for me, it's about self-awareness, and it's about that internal alignment and being able to block out the noise of the rest of the world, so you're not easily led and manipulated and influenced. You know, that you really understand what you're about, and not only do you understand it, you're prepared to stand up and say so, and then follow it through with action.
I'm just going to pop up Laurie's point. She says, we're going back to the point just before Dan's. I must tell you, I was about to sign out of LinkedIn and move along with my day, but because of your catchphrase, I remained on. Usually pause and reflect briefly even before I respond to a post. Then, of course, choosing my words wisely, because we know words once spoken create a life of their own. And yes, the right thing is ultimate, Mark.
It It is indeed. But and then look, so even to Dan's point there, right? And we know this too, this awareness thing and how necessary that is. And the self-awareness, I always find there's nearly a formula that follows through. You know, there's a self-awareness, there's a self-compassion that allows for self-awareness, that allows for self-worth. And like, you know, to those steps, like when we have that sense, so when we are aware of what we stand for, when we have that sense of worth and self-worth, and like Dan, I know you are a men's coach, and I've been working with an awful lot of men, and started with an awful lot of men over the last couple of weeks. And an awful lot of them, I've even asked them, what does it mean to you if I was to say I'm enough? And they're like, I don't know what it means. Don't know what it means. Like, I can't fathom a phrase like that. And for me, that's the epitome of kind of having that sense of self-worth, because that's where you can stand in your ground to who you are and who you want to be, and take action that has meaningful impact. And when you take action that's the wrong action, you can correct course because you have that awareness, because you can stand in your ground, because you know who you are supposed to be, and you know when it's not right by you. Back to the right thing kind of concept. When you develop that and develop that self-awareness and develop that sense of self-worth, you know when it's wrong. You know when you're doing the wrong thing. You know when you've said the wrong thing. Yeah. Now, are you? And maybe that's the piece that we struggle with from an ego perspective. Are we able to hold our hand up and go, I was wrong. I said the wrong thing there. I shouldn't have said that. That wasn't my intention. That wasn't what I meant. And Laurie did say words have such power, and they really do. And they can be hard to take back, but they're a lot worse if we don't take them back. When we do the wrong thing, when the action we take has a negative impact as opposed to a meaningful impact. And I think that there's a courage in that from a certain perspective, because there's a confidence needed in it. But it's also a courage to be true to yourself, which I think is more important, you know, and that's what we have the most meaningful impact from.
I agree with you, Mark. I think that's so important. I think in having conviction, it is actually almost, I'm going to say, it's almost like the ultimate of saying, no, I am being true to what I value, what matters most to me, and how I want to show up in the world. And this really matters. And actually, you know, other people might not like that, but that's their choice. This is me being true to myself, standing in my own truth, if you want to call that. And yeah, Claudie's right. You know, she's saying, you know, I think there has to be a deep-seated belief that drives your action. You know, I mean, I know, and you know, speaking from my own personal experience, I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, it shouldn't be project me, it should be project you. And how many times that, what's my niche, and you know, and I have sometimes I've been very close to walking away on many occasions where, you know, I'm just going, I'm a little bit tired of hearing the same narrative, but I have a very, very deep-seated belief that some way, somehow, some shape, that it is meant to do something on this planet. By the time I get there.
Can I challenge you on that for a second, Laura, though, right? And it's just that the word belief, to me, I struggle with that word, because I can believe the world is flat. I can believe the world is round. I can believe I'm amazing. I can believe I don't have value at all, right? It's not built on anything solid. So, and it's just what I mean is why I try to avoid talking about self-belief per se. I like to talk about self-knowledge and self-worth, because there's a truth to those things. Whereas, you know, we can have a certain sense of belief in ourselves, but it may not be accurate. It may be fabricated because we want to believe something about ourselves. And when you say that it's a self-belief, I would say it's a conviction that drives you.
I think the word that Dan used earlier is an inner knowing.
And I think, to be fair, I think when Claudie says deep-seated belief, I think that's what she means, right? She means a conviction.
Coming from here.
That's it. She means an inner knowing. You know, it's more than just a belief, actually.
Yes.
You know, we can choose to believe in anything we want to choose to believe in, can't we? But there's a difference between that and actually a deep-seated conviction, like knowing it in your bones, isn't it? You know, those people you mentioned earlier on, in the face of so much opposition, and threats of death, they had such a deep-seated inner knowing that they persevered, and because they had conviction and they understood that what they were doing was going to have impact. It was going to drive the human race forward. And boy, do we need some people in this world right now to have some deep-seated beliefs in the right thing to do to drive humans forward, because I struggle to see it in the people in power at the moment.
But doesn't that this other word that keeps popping up in my life and what I'm doing over the last couple of months, and that's where we're coming from, that deep-seated belief. It's that faith in ourselves, the thing that goes beyond the belief, beyond that faith, because the faith is it is that utter knowing. It's like it there's a leap in it, going, you know what, it's fine, I can trust this, you know, away I go. Like, it's in some ways it's that faith that when you're learn to ride a bike and your parent or your dad is pushing you on the bike and you're like, don't let go, and then they've let go and you're like, I can do this, you know. And it goes from belief to deep-seated to faith that, you know, I can do this, away I go. Like, and I know it's a simplistic way, but there's very few things where we throw ourselves. Every one of us has experienced that on the planet. Every one of us has experienced that moment riding a bike where suddenly you're on your own riding a bike, and it takes that little bit more of yourself to know you can do that.
And I think that, you know, you say it's a simple example, but actually I think the trouble is the world, we've just made it so complicated. We overcomplicate everything. I mean, I sat in a meeting yesterday and I was sort of sitting there going, you've just made this, and yeah, you know, it is a complex situation. Well, I'm just going to be, actually it's not as complicated as you're making it. No wonder we're in such a blooming mess. And I think that's the thing is that simplicity is what we need right now in order for us to be convicted to what we can do as a result. And I go back to, the example I gave, and, you know, the naysayers and all the rest of it. And I'm just, you know, even when I took on this role with working within, you know, the NHS, and somebody said to me, but how are you going to do that? And I said, I don't know right now, but I know I will do it. I don't know how, I just know. And I will go and I will have lots of conversations. I will digest everything there, but I just know that it will work, you know. And actually others, because they could see that I was totally convicted to the belief, if that's the right word, in what we were doing, they were prepared to come with me on the journey as to, you know, it might not work that way, it'll go that way. But, you know, and I think that's the thing. And I think in this world where it's just, you know, you use the word faith, Mark, but in this world that is really, really busy and very complex, very fragmented, it needs, I think, more people who are convicted to what they are doing in order to take step changes. I just can't see how the world will shift and more impact will happen if we don't change the way we think about these things.
Yeah, and happy are those who don't see and yet believe, and faith is absolutely key. And you know, I've been fortunate enough in the family that I come from. My grandmother and my dad are both people of faith, and that's taught me great lessons in how to have courage in your convictions. And yeah, I actually think faith is probably a better word for it than belief, because sometimes we want evidence before we believe. We want to test something out before we believe. But faith is a different thing, isn't it? It is a leap. But again, it comes from that inner knowing. And I think inner knowing comes from simplicity, Laura. You know, you said there we have this tremendous habit in the modern world of overcomplicating everything. We think it's clever. We think complicated is clever. So that's why we complicate everything, because we think it's clever. And actually, it's easy to confuse and manipulate and influence people when we complicate everything. But if we keep things really simple and we roll everything back to how we feel and what emotional values we're looking for, because the work you're doing with the NHS Law is because there is an emotional value that is important to you, and you have faith in that. So therefore, even though you don't have certainty, even though you don't know where it's going or what's going to happen or necessarily what step 3, 4, 5, and 6 are, you have that faith, that inner knowing, or as Claudie put it, that deep-seated belief that you're doing the right thing. You can feel it.
Yeah.
So and not only then do you drive yourself forward to have meaningful impact, but you're taking other people with you.
Yeah, and I think that's it, isn't it? And I think it's a very different type of energy that you have as a result, and that really changes, the mood, the energy, whatever you want to call it, in the people around you, whether that's a team, whether that's a family, whether that's a community. And I think that's really, really important. So, is it that simple about that? We just need to get to greater self-awareness, and greater, self-worth. Is it really that simple, Mark?
Dan really reminded you of something, right? Because it's a big question, okay? And I've been asked to give a talk, right, for so obviously Ireland's a very Catholic country, right? Well, it certainly was, but the relationship with the church is very fractured of the last however many years, and like a lot of local churches and parishes are closing down, and most of the priests are now in their 70s is the average age of a priest in a parish, which is insane to think about it. And I've been asked, I was speaking to a bishop of this area because he had seen a talk of mine. I don't know how this came about, and he asked me would I do a session with the priests. So it's in a couple of months' time, and he asked me what would I do, and I've been sitting with it to try and find, right, I have to go and talk to these people about faith. These are people who got ordained into an institution and into a structure. I have to talk to them about faith. And what does that mean, right? And I was heavily brought up in a Christian. I'm actually reading a book about Jesus at the moment, I believe, but I'm not. My kids aren't even Christian, right? But I'm on this circle of trying to find stuff out and trying to understand things. And as we were talking about that sense of meaning there, right? And this really strikes me as when you ask, is it as simple as that, right? So these guys their faith was in the institution. Their faith was in this. And because of the institution is falling around about them and they represent that institution, they're not respected anymore. And where they thought they had a place in society is destroyed because they're not respected. So that's an example of putting your sense of meaning in something that's outside of your control into the institution and the faith itself. And therefore, if that gets taken down, what do you do? Because that becomes a part of you and you get taken down. So it has to return. And this is where, as you were talking there, Dan, I've been kind of trying to find the way to talk about this. It has to return to why did you do the thing you do? So it wasn't just the institution. There was a part of you that was on a vocation. The part of you that had a conviction this was the right way to spend your life. So how do we tap back into that aspect of yourself that made this make sense, that made you have an impact in a way that was right by you and right by the people you were impacting? And that's always an internal job because it's only an internal job, and it can only be found by you by finding your what was that thing. And I often find with people when you're working with people one-on-one and they're feeling that sense of loss, and sometimes when we go back a little bit as to when they didn't feel lost, and they can tap into the things that gave them meaning at the time, the things that matter to them, and how they're not in my life anymore, and therefore my life, I'm struggling for that sense of meaning. Even to bring it one more step, I'm in a men's group, and I know, Dan, you do these as well, and it's an extraordinary group because of the sharing in it. Like this coming from guys who are, one guy was homeless, loads of the guys are ex-drug addicts, a lot of the guys have, split up with partners and stuff, but they find this sense of meaning and connection in the group because they can share openly about where they are and what's going on for them, and they don't need to hide who they are, so they can have a meaningful impact in life doing that. And I know that's kind of where it comes back to, that sense of being free to be ourselves as much as possible and follow through on what that is and what that is true for us. Because if we aren't doing that, then no action will have truly a meaningful impact for ourselves, because we're living someone else's life and not ours.
And that is so powerful. I think what I'm hearing here, Mark, is this whole thing of when we place our identity in something else, effectively that's we're not being true to ourselves, and that's ultimately when there is a shift in the external world, then almost it's like there's a disconnect at that point, and then that's where we start to feel shaky, and that's where we lose our faith in ourselves. That's when we, but actually if we start with the internal work, then go out to look for the things that satisfy, to give us meaning, that is the difference that makes the difference to us feeling really, grounded and convicted in whatever direction we do or go in. So powerful. So very conscious of time, and as ever, we could carry on. I'm still threatening to do our 24-hour, Are You Truly Living marathon. Maybe not tonight, but you've got cake to eat, Mark. That's if they've left you any. And Dan, I know you have far more important things to be getting on to. But I don't know, I suppose to close the conversation, give me one thing that you think that people should really take note of. When it comes to this, why does it really matter?
For me, Laura, it's about how you feel. And this is the important thing, right? It's not about what you think about how you feel. And it's, we've said it again and again and again tonight. This is an internal thing. So turn your attention inwards. Get to understand how you really feel. What do you really care about? And most importantly, why do you care about it? And when you know those things, then you get to have courage and conviction and meaningful impact. It's not to be found outside of you. It's to be found inside of you.
I love that. Mark, any final thoughts?
And that flows into, doing the thing that's right by you. That's what it flows into. And then and you trust, and like, we always know, we know what's not right, and hence why we struggle, because we know when it's not right. But that trust in what's right by us, and away we go. Like, we're unstoppable when we're doing things that are in alignment with who we really are.
No, I absolutely agree. And it's for me, it's when we work with ourselves, my gosh, it's such a different place. I always use the phrase, when we don't work with ourselves, it's like pushing water uphill with a rake. And it's so much easier when we work with ourselves. So there we go. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Lovely to see you guys, and look forward to seeing you next month. Although we have a little interlude between now and our next Are You Truly Living? Date TBC, our next Together as Allies, Men as Allies, LinkedIn Live will come between now and next month's Are You Truly Living? Date to be confirmed. But in the meantime, folks, have a fabulous evening, and look forward to catching up very soon. Bye.
Thanks all.